Thank you very much, Dr. Roy, for this very generous introduction and how happy I am to e-return to Harvard. Is that a term I can use? E-return, using the technology and the video conference to be with you, and it is indeed a great honor to be speaking to you today at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. I must thank the Middle East Initiative at the Kennedy School and the Center for Middle Eastern Studies and the Weatherhead Center for International Relations. I spent some time there myself at the Center for Middle Eastern Studies and at the Belfast Center of the Kennedy School. I was a visiting scholar in my field of study, political economy, where I also worked closely with the Weatherhead Center for International Relations. It just makes absolute sense that the three homes to me at Harvard have convened to make this event. I am really grateful and thankful, and I must thank particularly Dr. Sarah Roy and Ms. Hilary Rantisi, two great colleagues and friends, for helping arrange this event. And I very much miss conversations with Sarah and Hilary, and indeed with the wider Harvard community. I remember it fondly and thoroughly enjoyed the intellectual fervor and the fierce opinions there. It's like the old joke about economists. Ask five economists a question and you will get five different opinions. Six if one of them studied at Harvard, but not like those who have spent their life studying the Palestinian-Israeli issue. Unfortunately, I cannot be with you today in person. My absence, in fact, neatly encapsulates the state of Palestinian-US relations. This administration has been engaged in a long and systematic campaign at delegitimizing and de-recognizing the Palestinian people and our position. This has reached a point where we need to pause before traveling to the United States, even to take up invitations such as Harvard's. And this is not just affecting official relations, it is fracturing the all-important people-to-people relationships. I traveled to the US the first time in 1998 at the invitation of the US government under the International Young Leaders Visitors Program. I returned to the US in 2008 to live in Boston, the beautiful Boston, as a visiting scholar at Harvard. These were absolutely invaluable experiences for me. They enabled me to speak to and understand America and the world from there. It has proven similarly invaluable for thousands of Palestinians who have pursued their higher education in the US. And let's not forget the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, American Palestinians, who increasingly contribute to American public life, Congress, and public institutions, and also contribute to America's prosperity. This, the Trump administration, is trying to destroy these achievements, these traditions. This administration is trying to destroy our rights, national or individual. This administration is really trying to destroy the international. And therefore, dear audience, the title was chosen for me, which is Palestine in the era of Trump, a new strategy for politics. It is now painfully obvious that we must, and we are in need of a new strategy for Palestine to answer the current US administration's policies in our region. By we, I do not just mean Palestinians. I mean we as intellectuals, as academics, as diplomats, as people concerned with world events. I mean by we as people concerned with international conflicts everywhere, not just Israel-Palestine, and their successful resolution. The Trump administration policies on Palestine mark a decisive break from the past. This was obvious from early on. It was obvious when on the 16th of November 17, I was sitting in my office in Washington. I received a phone call from the State Department informing me that the US would close the PLO mission in Washington. By the way, that was long before even the confrontation with the US administration following the decision on Jerusalem. That was even during the time of niceties between us and the US administration. It was obvious when President Trump announced on December 6, 2017, that he was moving the US embassy in Israel to Jerusalem and recognized the city as Israel's capital. This was despite assurances given to us 1 week earlier that the White House would not move the embassy, as presidents from both parties had done since the beginning of the peace process. Only 1 week before the actual decision, we were reassured that this will not happen. This showed us that not only could we not trust this administration, the Jerusalem announcement showed us that this administration is instinctually and ideologically opposed to Palestinian aspirations and international law, let alone normal diplomatic practices. So when we hear the administration's so-called ultimate deal is imminent, and that the U.S. President's point hand on the conflict has consulted a lot with both sides, it's news to us, absolutely news to us. Whatever is in that ultimate deal, it has nothing. There's nothing whatsoever with us. We were not consulted. From the beginning, the Trump administration has been uniquely hostile to the Palestinians. It has pursued 4 policies that have pulled the rug from under any meaningful peace process. Number 1, it has sought to legitimize the illegitimate. As we mentioned just now, it has moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem against international law and the U.S. commitment itself under the peace process. It has recognized Israel's illegal annexation of the Golan Heights. It has done so unilaterally. It has set a precedent for Palestinian territory, where Israel's Prime Minister only a couple of days ago, Benjamin Netanyahu, has promised he will extend Israeli sovereignty to settlement in occupied territories. By the way, you all know that Israeli elections are happening as we speak now, and the early results are showing that actually Netanyahu might be winning again. And maybe partly because of that he made last minute, only a few days ago, that should he win, he will end the major settlements in the West Bank, and he would not make a distinction between any settlements, specifying that he would even annex settlements deep inside the West Bank. Number 2 of this administration work was seeking to denationalize and de-recognize the Palestinian people and their leadership, from the closure of the PLO mission in Washington to the defunding of UNRWA, trying to impose a definition on who and who cannot be called a Palestinian refugees. Number 3 of its onslaught is to de-internationalize the Palestinian conflict, the Palestinian issue. Nikki Haley spent her year in office primarily with the task of dismantling the international framework governing the Palestinian issue. This administration has treated international law with contempt. By recognizing the annexation of the Golan Heights, it has undermined one of the foundation stones of the post-World War II order, the inadmissibility of acquiring land by force. It harbors open hostility to the UN and any other international body. Just last week, as you may recall, it revoked the visa of the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. All this is an attempt at rendering international aviation and law irrelevant. And number 4 of this administration campaign is trying to turn our conflict into a purely domestic Israeli issue. And I beg your attention here, because this might be one of the most damaging attempts by this administration. How are they doing that? So Israel has publicly distanced itself from the two-state solution. And I mean here by Israel, the Israeli government, the Netanyahu-led government. There has been no protest from this administration, as you may have followed. Instead, the administration has decided to abandon the long-held U.S. position in support of the two-state solution itself, in spite, by the way, of our repeated calls for them to publicly endorse the two-state solution, and I mean by them the U.S. administration. The U.S. Consulate General to Palestine has now been relocated. To the U.S. Embassy in Israel, which in turn was illegally relocated to Jerusalem. Guess what it is now called, the U.S. Consulate General to the Palestinians. You know, it was in Jerusalem, East Jerusalem. It was primarily the key point of contact between the U.S. and Palestine. It was established in 1844, that is the U.S. Consulate General in Jerusalem. Now this U.S. Consulate General is called the Palestinian Affairs Unit in the U.S. Embassy to Israel. So the intention is absolutely clear. The intention is absolutely obvious. Now we are just an affair, a matter within Israeli politics, within Israeli affairs, larger And therefore, this administration talks only about economic incentives as if these are substitutes for national aspirations and individual rights. Only a few weeks ago, Jared Kushner, White House senior advisor, gave some insight to the media about the administration's thinking behind the ultimate deal. He talked about freedom of opportunity, talked about freedom of religion and worship. He talked about dignity and respect. He did not talk about rights. He did not talk about statehood. He did not talk about equality. These are all things that can neither be bought or sold. And economic prosperity is the outcome of a resolution, not the substitute to a resolution. And trying to proclaim they are will simply not get us anywhere. And this US administration is in fact engaged in a systematic deconstruction of everything that brought us to this very point, to this very moment. A systematic campaign of deconstructing everything that we have been accumulating in them. It is trying to whisk away the issues. Seriously, whisk away the issues, like some amateur magician, if I may use this metaphor, like exactly like amateur magician. Hey presto, no Jerusalem. Abracadabra, no refugees. Focus, focus, no occupation. What this administration seems to forget is that it really does not work this way. And by the way, they are also applying not only the amateur magician's tactic, focus on my right hand. I'm distracting you with my right hand. I have an ultimate deal, look here. But at the very same time, the real work is being done with their left hand, hocus pocus and removing all these issues off the table. But also they are using with us the tactic of the New York real estate business. If you want to really put a hostile bid on a building to buy it for 2 million instead of its actual price for 100, you actually drive the tenants out first by cutting water, cutting electricity, throwing a couple of rats. And they think, first of all, they think we are tenants. They don't know that we are the righteous owners who have been there for millennia. Nonetheless, Palestinian rights, Palestinian aspirations, Palestinian identity, these are not some talking points. And this administration, and I was told personally, directly by the most senior officials in the White House, when we mention the main issues, the main Palestinian issues like Jerusalem, refugees, borders, they would tell me, these are old ideas. You have to come up with new ideas. I mean, almost 500,000 Palestinians in Jerusalem is not a talking point. 6 million Palestinian refugees are not just some idea. 5 million Palestinians under military occupation, living under a separate legal system to those around them, is not just some distant relic of the past. They are real people in real places with real rights. What is old is our connection to and roots in the land. We keep telling them this is the only thing that old, ancient, is our connection to this land. That goes back millennia. That will not change and will never change, no matter what you do. That will outlast you, this administration, and any administration that comes after it. And we repeated that, what is an old idea? We repeated to them and to everyone when we were in Washington. What is an old idea? The old idea, the only old idea, is that all people are created equal and have certain inalienable rights. For this reason, President Mahmoud Abbas took the strategic decision to adopt a no-contact policy with the Trump administration since December 2007. A waterproof, rock-solid, no-contact policy with this administration. This no-contact policy was adopted to deprive the administration the game of deceit that they are engaging us. They are not engaging us. And to make sure that any step they take is unilateral, illegal, and isolated. I repeat, we want to make sure that any step they take, which has been the case, is purely unilateral, illegal, and isolated. But he did not just do that. Our president, our leadership, our president also offered an alternative. In February 2018, President Abbas traveled to New York to address the Security Council on behalf of the people of Palestine. I was there, his delegation. And he called for an international conference to implement international law, including, above all, the preservation of the two-state principle. His proposal included a number of specific steps, including the convening of an international conference to stipulate the rights and duties of each party based on the principle of mutual recognition and multilateral mechanisms to help the parties abide by and implement international law. In a nutshell, President Abbas and the Palestinian people called for internationalizing peace making. Since this administration appears to be fond of its own language, let me present to you, my friends, 5 ultimates of our own. The ultimate promise, the ultimate compromise, the ultimate failure, the ultimate retraction, and finally the ultimate consequence. I'll start with number 1, which is the ultimate promise, which was clear. It was the promise held to us in the 70s and the 80s by the US-led international community that they will fulfill our national rights on the territory occupied in 1967, that a state on the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital will be established, and a just resolution to the issue of refugees will be achieved. That was the ultimate promise. Should we abide by, agree to international resolutions, the outcome of that will be an end of occupation and the establishment of an independent sovereign state and the resolution to the issue of refugees. That resulted in the ultimate number 2, which is the ultimate compromise that followed. The ultimate promise that was delivered to us convinced the Palestinian leadership and the Palestinian people at the time, in the late 80s, 1988, to abandon our previous political position, which was, prior to 1988, it was our political platform was one democratic state on all the territory of historic Palestine. And in 1988, the PLO took that historic compromise to recognize Israel inside the 1967 borders in pursuit. This indeed was the ultimate compromise, which led directly and almost immediately to the peace process, first in Madrid in 1991 and then in Oslo. And Oslo was a breakthrough. For the first time, Israel recognized that Palestinians had the right to represent themselves like all other people. And like all other peoples, that meant they had the right to self-determination. And number 3 of these promises came the Oslo process. Number 3 of these ultimates, which I may call here the ultimate failure, really. Regrettably, the Oslo process was flawed, not in the framework, but in the process. It left negotiations to the two parties with regards to the imbalance of the power between them. With no regards to the imbalance of power between them. And it made the US the sole advocate. The party with the greatest influence in Washington had the advantage. And you know, the rest is history. Advantage Israel. The failure of the peace process is well understood, and I do not want to dwell. Let me just say that its single biggest failure was in not ending Israel's settlement in all these years, 26 years. From day one, and on the very land where we supposed to stay, illegal colonial settlements building continued relentlessly, remorselessly, devastatingly actually. But failure, though it was, there was a framework. Even with that failure, there was still a framework. The U.S. failed as mediator, but offering, by offering Israel during all that process only incentives, and we are talking about before the Trump administration. We're talking about all previous administrations. It has just during all that process, it was offering Israel only incentives to slow down its settlement project. It never held it to account, but there was still a framework. But now came the ultimate retraction, which has followed, and it is what we are witnessing right this moment by the Trump administration. A retraction in every sense of the word. This administration is undermining the very framework for the peace process, kicking away any stick to measure progress. And the administration is not siding with Israel in all this. as previous administrations did, by the way. This is not the first administration that could not deliver. But this administration is siding with Israel's settlement. That is the new development. It is siding with Israel's expansion. It is siding with a vision of greater Israel that precludes not only Palestinian national rights, but Palestinian individual rights. It is doing so by systematically unwinding the ultimate rules, and they are unwinding the rights we were given more than 30 years ago. Whether that is through de-recognizing the Palestinian people and leadership, or whether it is by ignoring international law and legitimacy. And now we are accused of holding on to outmoded concepts. That's the main accusation. The Palestinians are holding on to outmoded concepts. But in fact, it is, and may before I move on here, just to say that, the timbering with the ultimate promise is definitely putting severe strains, severe pressure on the ultimate compromise we made, because the compromise was an outcome of the promise. And in the absence of the promise and the reaffirmation of the promise, then everything would be up in the air. But nonetheless, this administration is trying to literally rewind the clock to bring us back to when there was no engagement with the legitimate Palestinian representatives, when even our very identity was in doubt, and with it our legitimate rights. It is a regression that we reject and resist. Hence comes the last ultimate. And I started by saying we have five ultimates we need to explain. The last ultimate is number 5, which is the ultimate consequence of all this. And here, think with me. What are our options? And we have been thinking thoroughly over the last 2 years. What are our options in the face of this sheer hostility and clear intentions? What are the options? Either, number 1, we can save the boat, simply save the boat. I mean, we have done our dues, we have kept our commitments, and two main parties to the equation, that is Israel and the US, are reneging on every commitment. So perhaps the first thing you may want to think about is to sink the boat. We can throw all the cards in the air, dismantle the Palestinian Authority, and let occupation take back its responsibility for all the occupied territories. And by the way, I'm sure those of you who are following the issue, there are increasing voices who are actually calling for such a move. Or number 2, we can affirm even more strongly our commitment to international law and the two-state solution, but change our strategy for implementing it, change the route to reach it, change the vehicle to arrive to that destination. Our leadership chose the latter. President Abbas chose the latter. We chose the latter. And this primarily, my friends and ladies and gentlemen, because, this thinking process, we came back with the conviction that this isn't about goals. It isn't about goals. There have only ever been two just resolutions to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Two just resolutions. The first is the Palestinians and Israelis, Jews and non-Jews, enjoy full and equal political, national, and civil rights in two democratic states on the territory of historic Palestine, divided according to international resolutions and law. This is the first option, and it is acceptable to us. And this is what is called the two-state solution. That there will be two democratic states respecting their respective citizens, divided according to international law. The second option that is acceptable to us is Palestinians and Israelis enjoy full and equal national, political, and civil rights in one democratic state on the territory of historic Palestine. These goals remain the same. We accept either of these two, but Israel rejects it. And again, when I say Israel, I mean the Israeli government. They reject both. There are three legal systems in the area of historic Palestine today, as we speak. One system is for Jewish Israelis, whether inside the 1967 borders or in occupied territories. That system is a liberal democracy, and it's been exercised now. There is a second system which is for Palestinian citizens of Israel, which are institutionally discriminated against. And by the way, the one most important criteria of today's elections in Israel is the big boycott of the Palestinian citizens of Israel to the election. The turnout was very low, historically low, for the Palestinian citizens of Israel, primarily in protest of the nation-state law that passed in the Israeli Knesset last year, in protest of them being third-class citizens. And the last system is what for us, the Palestinians, of the occupied territory, which is a system of military rule and military control. Now, separate legal system for separate peoples, I mean, you know where we'll go. There is a world in Afrikaans for that. That world is apartheid. It's the A word. And last year, Israel passed the nation-state law that states that Israel, of which 22% of the population are non-Jewish, is exclusive to the Jewish. So the separate rights for separate people it is a notion that is not giving us an option between the one state and the two state. It's only giving us the choice between actually the two-state solution or apart, or racism, or the status quo of the situation of three different legal systems. There is no alternatives. And however, friends, despite and maybe because of all the above, we do not want to turn the clock backwards. We only want to move forward. And we have been clear about that. Number one, we can no longer pursue a bilateral process. I mean, we have done that for almost years now. We can no longer pursue a process that has the U.S. as a sole mediator. The clarity of the expansionist agenda of Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli right has made it clear that this can be a bilateral process. I mean, a bilateral process about what? Discuss what? To reach what? To convince who? And also, and by the way, this has taken a long time to realize and to come to terms with. And also, the unilateralism of the Trump administration proves that we cannot trust this administration to enforce or even respect international law. The fact is that until Netanyahu made it an issue by promising to steal more land only a couple of days ago, the whole issue of military occupation, the whole issue of controlling the lives of 5 million Palestinians in the occupied territories was not even an issue in the Israeli election campaign. It was not mentioned. So the occupation is turning too comfortable for the Israeli public. The cost-benefit ratio does not provide sufficient incentives for Israel to hear arguments based on international law and universal law. They have fallen on deaf ears in Israel so far. And they have fallen on deaf ears with this administration. And instead, we must seek an alternative here. We must seek international support for a multilateral process that relies on the framework of international legitimacy and preserves the achievement we have made up to this point. Of course, this sounds like, what are we talking about? I mean, there has been such an attack on the international system. It's at its weakest point, but it is exactly because of that we defend it. And we will continue to bolster and to defend these achievements. I mean, the institutions we have built and the preparations for what we have made with the help of the international community. We have continued the continued support and the consensus of the international community behind us. Of course, minus the Trump administration, but by the way, not minus the US. And we are following the debate in the US. We are following the discussion in the US Congress. I mean, we do have the international consensus. And we do have the majority of the US. And we witness the many changes that are happening there. And we are not isolated. And we are not alone. In the recent Arab summit you may have followed in Tunisia, there was a reaffirmation about the Arab Peace Initiative, a reaffirmation about the Arab position vis-a-vis the need to end the occupation of Arab land, the establishment of a state of Palestine with East Jerusalem its capital. With all the exaggeration and the talk about the Israeli-Arab relations, the exaggeration and the talk about the international community foregoing our rights, it did not happen. And so far, the majority are keeping the equilibrium and protecting the post-Second World War order. So seeking international support follows directly from our insistence. So it's not an automatic. So we must insist ourselves and commit ourselves to international law. And we cannot insist and commit without also being part of defending it at this point in time when it is under such an attack. And we believe this even more strongly now. We do. When the international order that is represented by the UN and its institutions is under direct threat from the US administration and the US unilateralism, we believe this is because there is no other alternative. We don't see an alternative. And it is not just our interest here at stake, it is the interest of the international community as a whole. It is the interest of the global peace and order. Undermine the post-World War II order at your peril. Uncork that bottle and take your pick. Some you will like, some you will not like. I mean, Ukraine, the South China Seas, Kashmir, Croatia, Slovenia, the list goes on. It will only grow. Number one, we need to clinch to international order, no matter what, no matter Nikki Haley and her attack on the international order, no matter the attempts to dismantle that order, we Palestinians want to clinch into it, defend it. We have no other alternative so far, and we remember the horrors of the Second World War, the horrors of what happened, and therefore it was a result of the human family coming together, and we consider ourselves to be part of that family. And number two of our strategy is to continue encourage a strategy of popular resistance. And here, many people ask, what is popular? What is popular resistance? And let me, my friends, take this opportunity to really define it. At its very most basic, it is surviving on our land. And believe you me, this is not an easy endeavor. It's a very difficult endeavor. It is the father who ekes out a living to feed and clothe his children and pay for their school book. It is the daily mothers who send their children to schools every single morning, despite the obstacles that child may encounter. Armed soldiers at checkpoints, armed settlers not answerable to the same law, military incursions. I mean, these are the dangers that children face, and parents have to take decisions and consider these choices every morning, every evening in the occupied territories. And yet, Palestine has a nearly zero illiteracy rate and one of the highest PhD per capita graduates worldwide. That is resistance. This is resistance. It is building also our institutions to develop and help ourselves. Institutions like hospitals, schools, universities, and industries. And by the way, it is at the level of sovereign, independent, middle-income countries. This is not what we say. This is what the World Bank said. It is cleaning our streets, and it is legislating to encourage private enterprise and promote individual commerce. That is popular resistance. And yes, it is also taking to the streets to assert our humanity and our rights, including what you have seen in Jerusalem recently. I mean, the Christians and Muslims praying together in the occupied East Jerusalem, bringing the city to a standstill, reclaiming their city and their holy sites. And it is also the unarmed demonstrators braving tear gas and bullets to protest the theft of their land in the West Bank, in places such as Bil'in, Nabi Saleh, Ne'alin, Kafr Kaddoum, resisting on a weekly basis the wall Israel has built up and down the occupied West Bank. And to some success, by the way. People are still mobilized. People are engaged on a weekly basis. And it is also the peaceful demonstrations in Gaza, facing, and all these peaceful people facing bullets and grenades in Gaza, rejecting an Israeli siege has kept 2 million people in a cage for 12 years, barely able to survive, and to reaffirm their right of return to the lands from where they were uprooted in 1948. So popular resistance is all of this. It's all of this. It is not just the mass mobilization of all people everywhere. But that too, by the way, is only a matter of when, not if. That too is a matter of when, not if, given the current circumstances. So this stage, see the PLO seek out new constituents, new agencies, and new actors. This stage necessitates a change. And the process has begun. Last year, the Palestinian National Council was convened for the first time in 22 years. This resulted in the re-election of the Central Council, the PLO Central Council, which has already convened for twice since last year. And the PLO's supreme decision-making, this is the Central Council, It's the PLO's supreme decision-making body, specifically in order to prepare for possible national strategic decisions that only it, Council, the Central Council, is empowered to make. The Central Council was the body that created the Palestinian Authority, and it is the Central Council that can end it. Only the PLO Central Council can actually end the Palestinian Authority. So, and therefore this month also saw the former technocratic government replaced by one led by Fatah and other political parties, because this stage calls not for technocrats, but for really political leaders with local constituencies able to guide and mobilize the people. And the last point here about our strategy is that the international order is not only responsible for peacemaking, though we believe that only an international table will be able to resolve the issue, but also the international order is responsible for ensuring scrutiny and accountability. And here it has become plainly clear we must target the business of the occupation. As I said above, that the occupation is too comfortable for Israel. It's too comfortable. It's too comfortable not only from the side of the prophet, but it's too comfortable because we, the Palestinian Authority, and link it to the council and our ability to take decisions, we, the Palestinian Authority, are putting the bill, are making it so comfortable because we provide health, education, we even provide security for the status quo in the meantime. And it is more than comfortable, it is profitable. The occupation is, as much as it is ideological and political, is a money-making venture. Israel makes money from the resources of the Area C, which is, as you know, 60% of the occupied West Bank, and which is under not just Israeli military rule, but Israeli administrative rule. And it makes profit from agriculture there, from phosphate mining in the Dead Sea, from the water resources. Some 2,000 Israeli companies illegally operate in the occupied territories. They pay taxes to the Israeli government, not to the Palestinian Authority. The PA loses some 360 million annually in revenues and in direct contravention of the Oslo Accord itself that Israel signed. So Israel profits from an occupation that prevents us from direct contacts with the outside world, as you may know. All imports go through Israel ports. Many are redirected through Israeli companies to be resold to us. That deprives us of import taxes, which instead goes to Israel again. So Israel profits from having a captive market, a consumer market, by the way, almost as big as the Israeli population itself. So make no mistake, my friends, about it. This is a situation that has been sustained because of its profitability. So we need to target the profit, and settlements are a very clear contravention of international law. Not only must they be condemned, they must become burden to the occupier. And in 2018, we have worked hard with the international system, starting with endorsing UN Security Council Resolution 2334 during the last months of the Obama administration, that stipulated the establishment of a blacklist for all companies that are implicated in the dealing inside the occupied territories. By 2018, last year, the UN compiled the list of Israeli and international businesses that operates in the occupied territory. That list is ready. We know it's ready, but Israeli and US pressure has kept it from being published. So we believe its publication is absolutely essential. Businesses must be named and shamed, and we will exert every pressure to do so, because we know this will work. Because once you hit the economic interest, once you hit that contract, the change will start beginning. And the sanctions must start from the international legality, and products of settlements must be banned. And by the way, the EU have taken a decision to label settlement produce, and we are here in the EU and European countries, not for so long, given the Brexit and what is happening, but also to work with the EU to go one step further from labeling settlement produce to give consumers a choice to banning settlement produce. So this should be true of any occupation, not only in Palestine. So we believe that this is important to pursue, to continue, and there are so much that we need to do in the arena of accountability, including, by the way, effective ways to bring about other mechanisms like the ICC, like the ICJ, to make sure that the full force of law is applied. But it's not just economic sanctions. We are seeking the use of other international mechanisms, other international organs like the UNESCO and what have you. And you see the huge battle. Every time we join an institution, a UN organization, the US pulls out. The US has withdrawn from UNESCO, and it tells you how powerful that is. If it was not powerful, the reaction would not have been as severe. So, my friends, in summary, just to conclude, this administration has done us two favors, two major favors. Number one, by removing the fig leaf from a failed US-led peace process that has lasted for 26 years. They have just removed the fig leaf, and we needed that fig leaf to be removed. And secondly, by giving us, and here I don't mean us Palestinians only, I mean by us, all of us, in particular you, the intellectuals, the academics, the leaders in America, the ordinary people everywhere, a stark choice. We are a stark choice, and we are at a moment of choice, truly, in every sense. And which side are we on? I mean, it's so clear what are the choices. Either on the one hand, unilateralism, colonialism, and apartheid, and this of the jungle, chaos. All on the other, and you know, you are following that the administration is willing to throw the international order into chaos, into the dustbin of history. For the sake of what? Really, for the sake of what? Short-term political gain and a jackpot at the casino of Sheldon Adelson, if I may be very straightforward. Are we on the side of multilateralism, international law, and equal rights for all people? I know this sounds, you know, like, what are we talking about? What is international law? Why are we talking about international law? We have no alternative. We have no alternative. And the choice is to decide whether we can still cling to an idea that there is such a thing as justice, that justice must be equal to all, and that there is an international order that must be preserved. And yes, this is, I'm sorry, this is old-fashioned. It is old-fashioned. And yes, these are old ideas, but they survived similar adverse moments. Believe you me, these ideas that we must come together, that we must sort our differences in the chamber of the United Nations, that it is the will of the nation that bring an end to conflict, sustain international peace and security. Might be old ideas and old-fashioned, but they have survived similar bad moments before, much worse than this moment, and they will survive this administration. Guess why? Because we believe they are good ideas, and therefore we will stick with them. We'll just do them better. And I thank you very much for your patience and having me. And now we go for Q&A. Thank you very much.
Hello? All right, we'll take questions. There's a mic in the back, and please speak very slowly. I will call on people as I see you. Husam, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
You call it all one.
Okay, well, they're lining up.
So thank you for a great expose on how happened in the last couple of years. Clearly, there's a lot of anger, on the Palestinian side. I was wondering, what is it we can learn from those experiences? What has happened in the past year? What is the element of responsibility that the Palestinians have had to learn? So we did not get into this by accident. There was a lot of work or irresponsible work that had led to this conclusion. This didn't happen in a vacuum. And so what are the lessons learned that we can extract from this experience, number one? And number two, I think, are you preparing the Palestinians to be in a situation similar to what the Kurds are today, where we have a population that is spread over several countries, but really no territory of their own. Thank you.
Sam, would you answer? We'll have you answer each question.
Yes, well, I have to have the question. I'm sorry, there was a lot of echo. So I think if I heard it correctly, the question was primarily about the lessons learned from the failure of the last 26 years. Am I correct? And how can we learn these lessons? I think this is a very important question, my friend, and I think there are many mistakes that we have committed, and we must learn. The first major mistake, in my opinion, is actually to accept to start a process without it being absolutely clear by both sides on the end game. On the end game. So the Oslo was a process that has seen the PLO recognize the state of Israel on the 1967 borders, but in exchange, Israel has only recognized the PLO as a representative of the Palestinian people. So the Israel did not, from the outset, recognize Palestine. And then the process would have been just about a period in which we find ways to implement that agreement on the principle and the final destination. That was a major fault. In retrospect, I mean, no nation, including us, should have embarked on such a process and such commitment without a very clear understanding of the roadmap ahead. Number one. Number two mistake is accepting one brick of the illegal settlements to be built in the occupied territories during that process. That was a lethal mistake. And I must say that all the goodwill and all the argument that once we reach an agreement, all these settlements will disappear, they will be dismantled, have proven to be just a Trojan horse. A third mistake is by accepting the sole mediation of the U.S. I mean, for 26 years, the U.S. has been primarily the only mediator in this process. Israel, Palestine, and the U.S. is not a foreign policy issue; it's a domestic issue, and we should have actually, from the early stage of the peace process, should have insisted on a multilateral forum where the U.S. is on the table, but not alone on the table. I mean, why did we accept the U.S. to exclude all other international players was also another mistake. Accepting that you engage in a process without not only the carrot but the stick, i.e., ensuring that while you are at it, there are sufficient pressures in the non-violent sense. There are sufficient national and internal pressure for the process to continue in the destination you would want it to continue was also another failure. So there are a few lessons to be learned. Accepting a transitional period in itself without a very clear roadmap ahead should not be repeated. And I think any new leadership would study these mistakes very carefully.
Husam, he also asked whether the Palestinians find themselves in a similar position to that of the Kurds, being dispersed over a wide area with no territory of their own to claim.
Oh no! That will I don't think that will happen. Now we are 13 million Palestinians, roughly speaking. We have 6.5 million Palestinians living inside historic Palestine. Roughly speaking, around 4.5 million in the West Bank and Gaza, and almost 2 million inside Israel, Palestinian citizens of Israel. I think the one most important lesson that I should have answered you is that the Palestinians collectively have learned the lesson of 1948 and 1967, the lesson of leaving your home, even at gunpoint. So you come back after 2 weeks, you want to protect your kids, your family, and then come back. This has been a hard-lived lesson that you will not come back. People have been, refugees for 70 years. I do not think that any Palestinian will ever consider leaving Palestine. So we are there, and that lesson is learned very well. So we are there, and we are not just there silent victims. We are there also very positive and acting and producing with all the difficulties you see We have a very rooted society, very sophisticated society, sophisticated institutions, sophisticated civil society and NGOs. We still need much more. We have so many grievances, but no, I don't think that scenario is going to happen. The only thing that will happen is prolonging suffering, and this is exactly what the Trump-Netanyahu scenario is about.
Okay, next question.
Thank you. I had a question about the degree of support for the Palestinian cause more broadly in the Arab world. And more specifically, something that surprised me was when the U.S. moved the embassy to Jerusalem. Many of us were expecting large demonstrations in Cairo and Amman, Beirut, and so on in protest of that U.S. action against the Palestinian cause. In reality, there really weren't large demonstrations. And I'm wondering how to interpret that. Does that suggest that support for the Palestinian cause at the grassroots in the Arab world has weakened? Or is there another way to interpret the seeming lack of broad Arab popular support in the wake of the U.S. move of the embassy to Jerusalem?
There is the reality and there is the exaggeration. And your question is very relevant now. And the reality is things have been changing in the Arab world over the last few years. The Arab Spring has followed in terms of real issues in the Arab world. There is a state of chaos almost. So things have changed. Some are arguing that Iran poses a very serious issue. With that comes some shuffling of priorities and interests. But that is the reality. But there is a great deal of exaggeration that the reality means also that the Arab world is ready to abandon the Palestinian people and the Palestinian cause. That's not true. That's not true. There was an argument in the White House that some key Arab countries are ready to actually sell off and sell out the Palestinian issue. That did not happen. And I don't think it can happen because of your other part of the question, the Arab street. I mean, the issue of Palestine, the issue of Jerusalem, is not just a political issue in the Arab public and the Arab streets. It's an issue that has to do with the politics of identity, beliefs, settled beliefs of history, who they are and how they define themselves. So it's beyond politics, beyond Trump, beyond Netanyahu. It's been used by Netanyahu only yesterday, actually, in an interview before the elections, to actually convince the Israeli public primarily that he actually, as a prime minister, to be elected, he can keep the occupation and create warmer relationship with the Arab world. That does not mean that there are some relations with the Arab world. There has been relations with some Arab countries for the last 70 years, not only the last 5-6 years. Relations are there. There are two major Arab countries, Jordan and Egypt, that has reached treaties with Israel. But the king of Saudi Arabia last year convened a summit in Saudi Arabia. And at the beginning of the summit, he stood there and he said, I call this summit the Summit of Jerusalem. So despite all the blah, 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 the exaggeration and the selling of deceit and the selling of illusions by Trump and some officials in the White House, I do not believe the Arab world is going to abandon its equilibrium. I don't think so.
Greetings, Ambassador Zomlot. I have a question about another pressure point that you didn't mention when you talked about businesses and boycotts, Israeli businesses, and that is the role played by the PA security forces. And I wonder if you could address that. I mean, I think that is something that could really force Israel to reconsider what it's doing. But can you have the security forces play a different role than the role they were allotted under Oslo without dismantling the PA?
Yes, your question is also a very important question, which means why do we have to dismantle the whole thing? We might want to dismantle the thing that is becoming a net burden on us and a source of comfort to the status quo, starting with the security apparatus and the security forces. That's exactly why I hinted at the council, the PLO Central Council, and I hinted at restructuring our institutions in a way that will enable us to do just that, and exactly that. The PA security forces have been part of the Oslo agreement. They are part of the political process. They should be part of a horizon they should be part of back-rolling occupation. And if they are not, then we must rethink their value. But in the end, the Israeli occupation forces will not come to the middle of the cities and provide protection, civilian protection, and criminal issues, to deal with criminal issues. So the main thinking at this point in time is how to separate between the police and its function and the security apparatus under the commitment of the Oslo Accord. You've just put your finger on a major issue under discussion as we speak.
Professor Zomlot, so my name is Evelyn Ophir. I lived in Israel, Palestine for 13 years, and I'm just grateful to hear you. It's so important for me to hear you and your feelings. I have one thing that's so dear to my heart that I didn't hear is the actual relations, the personal relations between Israelis, whether they be Jews or Arabs, and the Palestinians in the occupied territories. How to build those personal relations, especially now it's so much more difficult for Israelis to come into contact. How do you feel realistically that building those relations with email and Skype, etc., is that going to add anything to the possibility of finding a resolution where there's going to be true equality in that area?
Yeah, unfortunately, this is again another victim of the overall situation. I mean, since at least 1967, there has been increasing contact between Israelis and Palestinians in the field of work and in many other spheres, and that has created many personal relationships and allowed the two societies to come to know each other, and many friendships were formed. But ever since Oslo came, one of the major consequences of that was the system of separation. It was meant to separate Israelis from Palestinians, and therefore increasingly it has become very difficult for these personal relationships to happen. And in light of the negative developments on the ground, in terms of the settlement expansion, in terms of the incursions, the fatalities and casualties incurred by Palestinians on a regular basis, it has become also very difficult for the Palestinian public at large to accept creating personal relationship in absence of a solution. And it has become much more difficult to argue the case. And I'll be very frank with you, it's almost the chicken and the egg argument. What comes first? What comes first? Personal relationship will lead to ending the occupation, will lead to a breakthrough, or a breakthrough will create a personal relationship. I belong to the second camp. I really do. Because it's very hard to sustain personal relationship in such a political context, in such a political environment. It's very hard to sustain the argument that Palestinians are expected to love the occupation while there is still an occupation. It's very hard. And by the way, we are unique in being requested, in being expected to not only love the occupation, but to protect the occupation. We are the only nation on earth that we were asked and requested to provide security protection to Israel and to the settlers during the Oslo process. Israel is requesting protection by us and from us, So the whole logic needs to be revisited. And I'm not saying personal relationships are not important. And here is the chicken and the egg, because without affecting the public opinion in Israel, also you will get nowhere. So how do we do this? How do we do this? Given what I tried to explain in my earlier introductory remarks, that the biggest obstacle is the economic comfort. How do we do this? And I think the main thing that we need to do is to allow for these personal relationships to be established by bringing an end to the political situation, not the other way around.
Hi, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and analysis with us. And I'm sorry that you are not able to be here with us today in person. My question has to do with Europe, and Europe has been such an important support for the Palestinian cause. I'm wondering how the rise of nationalism in Europe affects the dynamics between Europeans and the Palestinians and for the conflict in general.
No, I'm so sorry. Sarah, can you repeat the question? there was an...
Yes, she asked about the relationship between Europe and the Palestinians and how the rise of nationalism in Europe affects your relationship, the relationship between Europeans and the Palestinians and the conflict.
It does big time, and we are very worried about the rise, not of nationalism actually, of populism and of far-right fascist groups all over, and of these phenomena of closeness rather than openness, and it will certainly result in negative consequences on us, the Palestinians. If we believe, and we do believe, that only in cooperation there comes a solution. If we believe in international order, if we believe in blocks like the EU, and we do, if we believe that it's bridges that needs to be built, not walls, and we do, because we are suffering from the building of walls, then this phenomenon is very, very dangerous and counterproductive on us, the Palestinians, let alone in Europe. However, still, major countries are not governed by these factions, even though we see the rise of them. Opinion polls suggest that there are some dangers in key European countries, but there are always backlash. I mean, there might be a backlash towards the center-left in the foreseeable future. We don't know. But Europe is key, and Europe is much closer to Israel. And Europe is the biggest trading partner to Israel. Europe is the biggest donor to the Palestinian Authority. Europe borders Israel and Palestine literally, and therefore anything that happens in Europe, in Israel and Palestine, affects directly Europe more than it does to America. So Europe is much more relevant to our situation. But despite all that, Europe has kept its policy so far. It has reassured and reaffirmed its policy of international resolutions, two-state solutions, 67, over even the last year and a half, 2 years of the onslaught by the Trump administration. So Europe did not change its course until now. We see Brexit here in Europe to be a major development. We are following it on a daily basis, and it's very confusing, I must say. Nobody still understands. I left America, I left Washington, Trump Washington, arriving at Brexit land here, and I was thinking Israel and Palestine was complicated. I mean, how complicated the situation here is. However, this discussion will pose serious challenges to us Palestinians and to many people around us. This whole notion of wanting to be, to clinch into narrow nationalism is a challenge. It's a major challenge, and we hope that this is not going to be long-lived. So, we will not solve it on our own. This is a global phenomenon that is happening. Strongmen in Hungary, in Poland, in Czech Republic, who find in Netanyahu a real partner, not because of the security cooperation and the economic interest, but because of the ideological matching. Both think that Netanyahu exports, and that the existential threat to Israel is the Palestinians and the Palestinian refugees. And Orban of Hungary argues that refugees pose the biggest threat to Hungary, and that he wants to see a pure society. We have heard these terms before. So yes, that's why Netanyahu convenes a summit between the 5 leaders of these strong populist men, far left parties in Jerusalem. And that's why you see the Israeli flag now flying behind Bolsonaro of Brazil, and he was in Israel also only last week. But take the risk here and say this. Now is not our moment, my friend, in history. It's not our moment. And Netanyahu has said it only recently that, practically he was saying he won. He won, he made the right pick. He sided with the fascist, extreme right-wing, phobic people from Trump all the way to Orban in Hungary. And we are not in our best, we are comfortable where we are. We are really comfortable with the progressive voices, we are comfortable with the liberal voices, we are comfortable with the academics, the progressive Jews, with the students and the youth, with the human rights organizations, with the singers and poets, and name it, with the sport. Well, I was in Scotland only a couple of weeks ago, and I visited a couple of football clubs. I mean, you will not soccer in America, you call it soccer. You will not believe the level of support and love and compassion. So this is not our moment, but it's not a moment that we go that way. It's a moment we stick to our principles, and we stick to our constituencies, and we stick to our people and allies. You are people, and you are our allies. And so this is not our moment, and this is not your moment. But we will clench into you, and we will clench into our the color of our skin seriously, and we will have to bite the bullet in the coming few years until this stupid will pass.
Thanks. My name is Jared Schwartz. I had a couple of questions. One was your position on climate degradation, which the President of the United States terms a hoax. The other question has to do with your assessment of Bill Clinton's plan for dealing with the Palestinian refugee problem, which I only heard. I have a limited grasp of the intricacies of that plan, but I'm wondering whether, I'm assuming you're familiar with it, and whether you think that it might be part of a more comprehensive two-state or I actually personally favor a sort of a Benelux-like thing with a Palestinian state and a Israeli state and a joint administration for like electricity and water and rotating memberships. Anyway, those are the two questions. Feel free to ignore them or.
Was the second question? So the first question I got, the refugees.
Sorry.
The first question was the refugees and Clinton. The second question was?
Your first question, Judge. Could you repeat?
Yeah, the first question was whether you regard that global warming, climate change science is a hoax or not. Whether you believe that the overconsumption of petroleum is causing dangerous levels of global warming and storms and heat and refugee problems into Europe and the United States and so forth. That kind of a big question.
No, it's not. It's a very relevant question. And by the way, there is an environmental war happening in Israel and Palestine, and we are affected the most by this issue, the issue of environment, the global warming. And you want to go and visit some statistics. It's absolutely disheartening to know what is happening to our environment in the occupied territories. Settlements are ditching their sewage system and what have you, and agricultural land is being what's the word? Lacking any ability to actually becoming fertile. There are some chemicals that are being disseminated or sent off to the streets all over the West Bank. Unique birds, natural habitats are being affected. So conflicts are not innocent of also issues of the environment, but we Palestinians believe in this global warming phenomena, and we have some scientists, and we're very proud that actually are part of this phenomena, and we think that human consumption has to come to some sort of a control, and we believe that we have to leave this earth, our children, as we inherited it, and we are not taking serious responsibility, and we very much oppose President Trump's decision to walk out of the Paris Agreement. And we think that was one of the most, dangerous acts that he could commit against our own children for the future. So I would even want to include this whole discussion. You just give me ideas, if intentional or not, to focus on the issue of environment in the future, because we are being deprived even a healthy environment, even if a political solution would arrive in the future. As for the refugees, sir, I was born in a refugee camp to the very south of Gaza Strip in Rafah. And I was born in a tent, practically speaking, to a refugee family. We came from where Israel is now, Palestine, 1948. And I was raised among the refugee community, so I know the narrative. I lived all of my life as in the refugee camp before I traveled. And I can tell you the issue of refugees, from my perspective, is the easiest of all issues. It could be the entry point to a solution rather than anything else. And the successive Israeli governments have made it to be the most difficult issues and have made it to be the mother of all evil. Well, it's not. And I'm not aware of a practical proposal by President Clinton. Actually, there was negotiations in Taba after the Camp David, which is a Clinton-sponsored summit in the year 2000. There was negotiations in Taba in the early 2001, where the issue of refugees was discussed, and there were a lot of breakthroughs. There was a serious breakthrough in Taba between the two delegations, the Israeli and the Palestinian. And here is the issue. The issue is not just a lump sum of 6.5 million Palestinians who will come and swarm or storm Israel demographically. In itself, a racist, in my opinion, it's a racist notion that people would be a demographic threat. However, the issue of refugees, part of it, in my opinion, 50% of it, half of it, is recognition for the government of Israel to take responsibility and recognize what happened in 1948. Just recognize. Yesterday, we commemorated the Deir Yassin massacre, only yesterday. It is very well documented, my friend, what happened in Deir Yassin at the hands of the Haganah and the Irgun. So recognition of the massacres that happened, the ethnic cleansing that happened, would give my father, who was born in his village in what Israel is now, would give my father 50% of what he wants, which is acknowledgement. Somebody to come out and say, sorry, we're sorry. That's 50%. But to deny it for all these years, and to keep blaming the other, and blame the victim, and blame the refugees, and disseminate all these lies that they have left on their own, as if anybody would leave his home or her farm on their own, is not going to help. The other 50% is to deconstruct this whole issue. How do we deconstruct it or unpack it, if you may? There are options that could be given to refugees. There are international standards that are applied here. Refugees must be compensated in all options because they have lost property and land and livelihood for decades. But in addition to compensation, refugees could be asked in the Palestinian situation, could be asked to either return to their homes, original homes, be integrated in Israel, or they could return to the state of Palestine to be created. That's option number 2. Or they could be settled and nationalized in the countries that they are in right now, Lebanon, Jordan, what have you. Or number 4, they could be resettled in a third country. You know what's the key to this standard, national standard? And this the same standards were applied in Kosovo and many other places. The key is to give people the options. Give them the options. They will choose. And in my opinion, should we give them the options and give them the dignity, I don't think you will find out that this issue is going to be the biggest issue. The biggest issue now is how do you remove 700,000 Israeli illegal settlers from the occupied territories? And Netanyahu has said no government can now, and his government will never. How do you actually end the situation in Jerusalem? If you ask me about Camp David and President Clinton, the one thing that broke down the Camp David talks during the Clinton era was Jerusalem, not refugees. Did I answer?
Yes. There's nobody else up here. I have a quick follow-up, if it's okay. And that is the positions on climate change of the governments of Iran, Iraq, Saudi, and the Gulf states. Are any of them similar to yours and mine? Namely, that it's a real problem and that we need to deal with it. Or is that needs further research. Thank you very much. Nice to meet you.
Pleasure, my privilege.
Good questions. Husam, I would like to ask you a question. You're from Gaza, and I, as you know, am very involved with Gaza. What is the future that you see for Gaza and the relationship between the PA and the Hamas regime? Most of my friends now feel that any kind of unity or reconciliation is a dream, is an illusion. And what will happen in the future, in your view, between these two very important areas?
I knew you would ask that question, Sarah. Well, yes, I am a Gazan, and because I am a Gazan, or I was born in Gaza, I know that without Gaza, there is no Palestinian national project, there is no Palestinian national movement. In Gaza was the creation of the national movement. In Gaza is where our identity is the most solid. And it's not a coincidence that in Gaza started Fatah and Hamas, started the first intifada. In Gaza is the mother of all beginnings, according to Mahmoud Darwish. So without Gaza, we lose our compass and we have nowhere to go. We have a particular situation of a Palestinian faction that was not imported. These are not people who came from Mars. Those are not, according to the Trump administration, the definition of the Mexicans aliens. They are not aliens. They are part of us. They are part of the Palestinian fabric and an integral part of us. It would have been much easier if they were coming from outside. And as such, it's a very deep issue, but it's an internal issue. It's a household issue. Without fixing it, it's a self-inflicting wound that has been open for 7 years now. And it is a self-inflicting wound. We have damaged ourselves severely by this situation. And I don't want to engage, I hesitate, Sarah, as you know, to engage in domestic issues. It is a domestic issue. I hesitate to engage in this because I believe that me as an ambassador for the state of Palestine that is recognized by 138 states have the responsibility to present Palestine, including Hamas, and have the responsibility to defend all Palestinians. That's why in the UN only a couple of months ago, we actually fought hard, the US, when it presented a resolution to list Hamas as a terrorist organization and to define Hamas as such. And we won, by the way, as the state of Palestine. So I feel hesitant and embarrassed, but Hamas is not good news. And unless Hamas realizes and acknowledges that becoming part of us requires certain abiding by certain rules, we will not accept a reconciliation process that will not be clear on the ends and clear on the methods. We have been engaged in a 7-8 year process of reconciliation, more than that, since 2007. And the one major thing that we want from Hamas is that they accept being part of the national plan, not a substitute to the national plan. And they are part of the national ship. They accept that the ship has a captain and the ship is sailing in a certain direction, and there are rules to govern the sailing of that ship. These rules are international law. We Palestinians accept international legitimacy. We cannot call for international legitimacy and not abide. And we must behave in a way, even when we are protesting, in a way that is in full compliance with international legitimacy. We have been saying to Hamas that they must, come to terms with these requirements, and so far we have failed. What does this mean? This means that we must do it better, try better ways to do it, especially that Gaza is becoming, Sarah, as we speak, our softest spot, where in fact Gaza was our strength, our motor, our propeller, our energy. Now it's our burden, our biggest, it is the soft spot, because if you want my opinion about the so-called ultimate deal, it's Gaza. That's the ultimate deal. That's why the White House convened a conference in Washington in March, when I was still in Washington, to discuss Gaza, not Palestine, and to convene and to generate funds for Gaza for Palestine. So the real intention is to substitute Palestinian statehood in Gaza. And therefore, the danger is becoming much more national, strategic, existential for us to fix this issue. But Sarah, and here to all my friends, political Islam is not an easy thing. And you wrote a book that is a major reference now, Dr. Roy. Political Islam is a very difficult phenomenon, and it was not dealt with successfully in many Arab countries and in many Islamic countries. In Egypt, it wasn't dealt with. In Algeria, it wasn't dealt with. In Jordan, it wasn't. In many of these places, it remains to be a major issue. How do you bring political Islam into national politics. This does not mean that we in the national camp are innocent and we are just angels. We are not, and we need to learn how to share power, and we need to learn how to reassure parties and factions other than us. And I don't think we are very good at that. Having said all that, I haven't answered your question. I don't believe that there will be an agreement between us and Hamas in the very near future. There has been many demonstrations in Gaza over the last few weeks protesting this situation, protesting Hamas, protesting the dire economic situation, as you may have followed. The only possible scenario that we could wait for, actually, is all of a sudden Hamas realizing that it might not be ready to be part of the political system, but it's ready to give up Gaza. And hopefully that will not be too long from now, because Gaza cannot be, the responsibilities of Gaza are huge, and Hamas is discovering how huge is that and how much the suffering of people are becoming simply unbearable.
Thank you. Any other questions? None? Okay then. Husam, thank you so very much. This has been very informative and very rich. We only wish you could have been here with us in person, but hopefully that will occur at some point in the future. So thank you again. Thank you.